This episode of Mr. Hutchings History is now streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all your favorite platforms like Castbox, Podcast Addict, and Amazon Music. Tune in now.
Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Hey everyone, ready to dive into some history?
Let's do it.
Today we're heading straight into World War II.
To a day that, everyone knows about Pearl Harbor.
But there's always more to the story, right?
Absolutely. And we've got some fascinating sources to dig into.
From FDR's Day of Infamy speech, which, wow, what a speech.
Yeah, that's a powerful one.
To different historians' takes on Pearl Harbor.
From all over the spectrum, really.
We're going to see how differently this event's been interpreted over time.
That's what's so interesting about this deep dive.
Not just what happened at Pearl Harbor, but all the, ripple effects.
Exactly. How it changed America's role in the world.
And FDR's actions, too.
Oh, there's a lot of debate about that still.
Did he know about the attack beforehand?
Some historians think so. It's a controversial theory.
For sure. We'll look at all sides of that.
And we'll even examine Pearl Harbor through a Marxist lens.
Which I'm really curious about, actually.
It adds a whole different dimension, you know.
So, get ready for some aha moments, I think.
Yeah. It's a story with so many layers, you know.
Twists and turns, and it just it keeps raising questions.
Even all these years later.
All right, so let's set the scene.
December 7th, 1941.
A seemingly normal Sunday at Pearl Harbor.
Until suddenly,
Chaos.
Japanese planes fill the sky.
Bombs raining down.
Torpedoes hitting ships.
It's hard to imagine the scale of the attack.
19 U.S. ships sunk or damaged.
Including 8 battleships? That's massive.
150 planes destroyed, over 2,400 Americans killed.
Just a devastating blow.
And, this wasn't just Pearl Harbor.
Right, this was part of a larger Japanese offensive.
Coordinated attacks across the Pacific.
The Philippines, Guam, Midway.
Even places like Hong Kong.
They were really trying to cripple U.S. power in the Pacific.
It was a bold move.
But here's something interesting.
Yeah, what's that?
As devastating as Pearl Harbor was, it wasn't the knockout Japan wanted.
How so?
Well, think about it. The U.S. aircraft carriers, the really important ones.
Like the core of their naval power.
They were out at sea during the attack.
Oh, wow.
And those vital onshore factories and oil reserves.
The ones that fuel the Pacific Fleet?
They were left intact.
So Japan kind of missed those key targets.
Exactly. And these, what seemed like small oversights.
Have huge consequences.
They allowed the U.S. to bounce back much faster.
And launch a counteroffensive.
Which I'm sure Japan wasn't expecting.
It's like even in a moment of chaos like that.
Unforeseen factors can completely change history.
That's true.
Now imagine being President Roosevelt at this time.
The weight of the nation on his shoulders.
People are terrified, grieving.
He has to address the entire country.
And he does, just one day after Pearl Harbor.
December 8th.
He delivers his famous Day of Infamy speech to Congress.
Even reading the transcript now, it's powerful.
I get chills every time.
It's a masterpiece of rhetoric.
When he says, yesterday, December 7th, 1941.
A date which will live in infamy.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked.
Powerful stuff.
And it had this incredible unifying effect.
Right. Think about America in the 1930s.
So, divided over isolationism.
The scars of World War I, the Great Depression.
People did not want another war.
But FDR's speech...
It cut through all that.
It galvanized the nation.
It was like, boom, overnight.
Americans went from hesitant to ready to fight.
And it's interesting because FDR didn't just react to Pearl Harbor.
He used it.
He shaped the narrative.
His speech wasn't just a response, it was a turning point.
The end of American isolationism.
The beginning of their journey to becoming a global superpower.
But of course, with any major historical event, there are questions.
Mysteries, controversies.
And one of the biggest ones surrounding Pearl Harbor is...
Did FDR know about the attack beforehand?
It's a question that still sparks debate.
And that's where the revisionist school of thought comes in.
Historians like John Toland.
They propose this theory that FDR might have known.
Maybe even allowed it to happen.
To get public support for entering the war.
Whoa, that's a bold claim.
It's controversial for sure.
Mainstream historians, folks like Patrick Moderney, they disagree.
They say there's no real evidence.
And that FDR was genuinely surprised by the attack.
But the debate continues.
And it raises these questions about trust, leadership.
And how we interpret history.
It makes you wonder. What if things had been different?
What if the aircraft carriers had been in the harbor?
It's a lot to think about.
We've only scratched the surface here.
The attack itself is just one part of the story.
There's a shift in public opinion.
The U.S. entering the war on two fronts.
The transformation of their economy.
We'll dive into all of that next time.
So stay tuned. There's so much more to uncover.
This deep dive into Pearl Harbor and FDR, it's just getting started.
We'll be back. Welcome back, everyone.
All right, so we just left off talking about the shock of Pearl Harbor.
And how it really shook America to its core.
Yeah, and it totally changed their stance on the war, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, before Pearl Harbor, most Americans were like,
let's stay out of this. It's not our fight.
Isolationism was huge, right?
Big time.
They were still dealing with the aftermath of World War I.
And the Great Depression, nobody wanted another war.
But then Pearl Harbor happens.
And everything changes.
Yeah, suddenly it's not some distant conflict anymore.
It's a direct attack on their soil.
And the sources really capture this feeling of
vulnerability.
Yeah, like the world just came crashing down.
And it wasn't just news headlines, you know?
It was real people, real lives impacted.
It was a visceral experience for the whole nation.
So this shared experience, it really shifted public opinion.
Big time.
Before Pearl Harbor, the country was divided.
Should we intervene? Should we stay out?
But after the attack,
like a switch flipped.
Public opinion swung hard towards war.
Almost overnight.
I mean, that's got to be one of the fastest
and most dramatic shifts in public opinion ever.
But it makes sense, right? Because for them, it was personal.
It wasn't just some abstract war anymore.
It was a threat to everything they knew.
Their families, their homes, their way of life.
And this shift had huge political implications, too.
Totally.
Politicians who'd been advocating for neutrality.
They suddenly switched gears.
Supporting intervention.
And Congress.
They went from hesitant
to declaring war on Japan just days after the attack.
Talk about a 180.
So yeah, America's officially in the war now.
But now they're facing a fight on two fronts.
Europe and the Pacific.
That's gotta be daunting.
For sure. And at that point, the U.S. military.
They just weren't prepared for a global war like that.
They hadn't been focusing on military buildup.
They had shortages of everything.
Planes, tanks, trained soldiers.
It's amazing how quickly they managed to mobilize.
Yeah. FDR and his administration, they knew they had to act fast.
They implemented all these sweeping measures.
Mobilizing the entire country for war.
Factories that had been making cars.
Suddenly they're producing tanks and planes.
It's a complete overhaul of their economy.
A massive undertaking.
And the War Production Board.
Established in January of '42.
They played a key role in this whole transformation.
Imagine trying to coordinate all of that.
Industries, labor unions, government agencies.
All working together to supply the war effort.
It's mind-boggling.
The scale of it all.
By 1944, the U.S. had become what FDR called
the arsenal of democracy.
They were churning out war material like crazy, supplying their own forces and the Allies, too.
They were instrumental in turning the tide of the war.
It's a testament to American industry and resilience.
Absolutely. This shift from peacetime to wartime powerhouse.
It shows their industrial might.
But also the power of leadership.
FDR knew they had to act decisively.
And he rallied the nation to meet the challenge.
Now, FDR's leadership during this time...
It's been the subject of a lot of debate among historians.
Some, like William L. Shirer, they see him as a visionary.
The traditionalist view.
They say he steered the nation through its darkest hour.
And that bringing the U.S. into the war.
It was ultimately crucial to defeating the Axis powers.
They see him as this decisive figure.
Willing to make tough choices to protect democracy.
Inspiring the American people, forging alliances.
But then there's the Marxist school of thought.
And they have a very different take on things.
They tend to view U.S. involvement through a more...
cynical lens, maybe?
Yeah, they argue that FDR's policies were driven by...
economic and imperial interests.
That he was more concerned with protecting capitalism.
And expanding American dominance.
They point to the economic benefits the U.S. gained from the war.
Increased trade, new markets.
As evidence of this ulterior motive.
It's a very different interpretation.
It makes you question, like, what were his real goals?
Is it purely about freedom and democracy?
Or was there something else at play?
It's a debate that continues to this day.
And then there's the post-revisionist school.
Who try to find a middle ground.
Historians like John Lewis Gaddis.
They acknowledge the geopolitical realities.
The complex world FDR was operating in.
They say he was genuinely concerned about the Axis threat.
But also that his actions were influenced by...
a desire to protect and advance American interests.
So it's not a simple black and white situation.
Right, they see him as a pragmatic leader.
Adapting to changing circumstances. Making tough decisions under pressure.
They highlight his skill in forging the Allied coalition.
bringing together all these different
and
countries,
different ideologies and goals.
fight a common enemy,
They also acknowledge his ability to mobilize the nation.
and rally the American people for the war effort. So many different takes on FDR and Pearl Harbor.
It really shows you how complex history is,
Yeah, not just dates and facts.
all the different interpretations.
One event can be seen in so many ways.
And the fact that we're still debating it
All these years later,
shows just how impactful Pearl Harbor was.
not just for America.
Or the whole world.
It wasn't just an isolated attack.
It had these huge ripple effects,
Changed the course of World War II.
reshaped global power dynamics
And it really brought America onto the world stage.
in a way they hadn't been before.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Let's think about what we've learned.
it's clear that Pearl Harbor was a turning point,
It ended American isolationism,
thrust them into this role of global superpower.
and it really shaped the world we live in today.
We've also explored these different views on FDR.
Was he a reluctant warrior forced into action?
Or did he skillfully use this tragedy to his advantage?
The traditionalists, revisionists, post-revisionists,
They all have their own arguments
and it's up to us to consider the evidence.
and come to our own conclusions. And that's what's so great about history, right?
It's not just about memorizing facts,
It's about thinking critically,
questioning assumptions.
realizing that even the most well-known events,
They often have these hidden layers of complexity.
and our exploration doesn't end here.
Oh, absolutely not.
This is just the tip of the iceberg.
There are so many books, articles, primary sources out there.
Just waiting to be discovered.
What will you uncover in your own exploration?
What new insights will you find?
What questions will you ask?
That's it for our deep dive into Pearl Harbor.
Thanks for joining us.
Keep exploring, keep questioning.
And most importantly, keep learning.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.